This story starts out on a completely normal, ordinary, beautiful, warm day on the 23rd of May 1993. The teachers in the local school often took out the pupils to this nearby lake in Lágymányos, which is located in the outskirts of Budapest. But to say that it was a lake is kind of an exaggeration because it was a swamp at best. Over the years, the water dried up and the area became a swampy, smelly, muddy mess with only some frogs and small fish living in the water. And because it just became uglier and more useless over the years, the local legislation decided to fill this area up and build on top of it. In fact, this area was going to give place to the 1996 World Fair. Hungary then ended up cancelling the World Fair for other reasons, which was not going to be held at all anywhere. But back in 1993, the plan was to find a large area and build on top of it so that they would have enough room for the pavilions. And this ugly, useless swamp seemed like the perfect place. However, the local school teachers wanted the children to experience the fauna and flora as much as possible before this land was going to be forever built in. So they took out the kids as many times as they could, really, even just a few days right before the construction was bound to start. As the kids were observing the frogs and the tadpoles, one child suddenly yelled and called out for a teacher. He found something in the water, but it did not look like it belonged in a swamp. It looked like a human head. Of course, the police was quickly called and they were able to locate the rest of the body over the next 2 days with the help of cadaver dogs. But this body wasn't simply decapitated. It was dismembered into 4 more pieces. And the torso was methodically gutted out and all of the internal organs were missing. And each dismembered body part was in a body bag that are usually used in hospitals, just scattered all around in the swamp. Even with all of the internal organs missing, it was determined that the cause of death was most likely several fatal stab wounds to the heart. And the investigators first assumed that the remains were there for about 8 to 10 days before they were found. Now, it was assumable that whoever did this terrible, unspeakable thing thought that the body would never be found because the area was going to be filled in and there was going to be just concrete poured all over it anyway. And it was also assumable that they thought that the smell of the swamp would just mask the odor of the decomposition. But the killer was wrong, because he obviously did not think that school kids would be frequenting this area. And I'm just so sad for that children who had to witness such a grotesque and traumatizing sight as a floating head in the water when they were just searching for frogs. But now the police had to find out the identity of the victim. And it was quite a peculiar situation, and you may even find it morbid. I for sure did. They took this severed head and reconstructed it with makeup to make it recognizable again, to be able to take some pictures of it to see if it matches anyone in the list of missing persons. But let me just emphasize that this body was in a late stage of decomposition, so much so that the experts thought that it was 8 to 10 days that the body parts were there in the swamp. So I wonder how much makeup they had to put on this severed head to make it recognizable at all. And unfortunately, the sources don't go into detail about how exactly they figured out the identity of the victim. I mean, I can't tell you how soon and what led to figuring out her identity. It could have been with the help of the reconstructed headshots of the face. It could have been that the family members or friends were proactively searching for somebody and went to the police and they were able to identify the head. or it could have been that the police had some guesses or ideas who the victim could have been, and they went and asked the family members and the relatives and the friends if they recognized it from the pictures. But in either way, the victim was soon found out to be none other than a woman named Lakatos Olga. I shouldn't even say woman, because she was still underage. And sadly, Olga did not have an easy life. She was born into a Roma family, and those Roma families that want to keep their traditions can be extremely strict with the female members of the family. Olga had a good enough childhood by all accounts, and for what we can call a good childhood in a culture that systematically oppresses and almost grooms girls into being the servants of their future husbands. But as soon as Olga turned 15 years old, her mother jewered her up. And this is kind of like a ritual when the mother dresses up the 15-year-old girl into the finest of clothes and gives her jewelry. Some are new, some are family heirloom, and takes her out to the street to show the local men that this girl is now a young woman and is eligible for marriage. In fact, Olga's parents had already agreed with another rich and influential Roma family in town to marry Olga to their son. So I guess we can call this an arranged marriage, because Olga did not have a say in this, and at the age of just 15, she was married to a boy she did not necessarily love or like or even know. And this practice is quite common amongst traditional Roma families, and according to this, the girl has to move in with the family of the husband. So Olga was only 15 years old and was already taken away from her family, married into a new family, and now she had to abide by their rules and habits. And I am not criticizing Roma traditions or anyone's traditions. I see that some cultures are more traditional than others, and I'm not saying that what they are doing is wrong, but I do question how moral it is to force a 15-year-old child into an arranged marriage with a person that she doesn't know, to be torn out of her previous life, taken away from her family that she already knows, and before she's even 18, before she even becomes of age, she already has to have sex and give birth to probably multiple children. I definitely think that 15 is way too young to be able to understand the severity of this situation and to be able to consent to this. I mean, the parents not only allow, but technically force their 15-year-old daughter to have sex with a person and give birth when she is not even mature enough. I think that's just too young, but that's just my opinion. But on that same note, let me just clarify that not every Roma family does this. Even the traditional ones don't necessarily follow such strict rules. And even those girls that are forced into an arranged marriage like this often rebel against their fate. Not everybody agrees with these traditions, and neither did Olga. After only a couple of months living with her husband's family and being in this new marriage, she was already fed up and moved back in with her family. Her dad was more understanding. He really tried to help her and talk about her feelings with her, but Olga's mom did not feel the same way. She was a very traditional woman, and she forced Olga to move back in with her husband again. And just a couple of weeks after moving back home, she had to move back to her husband again, who was already pissed with her about not following the traditions and not abiding by their new family's rules. But again, she tried, she gave it a try. She didn't want to give up on her family's traditions and on her mom's expectations, and she decided to move back in with the husband and see if it works. But it didn't. And again, just after a mere few months, she left her husband once and for all and moved back in with her family again. And at this point, she's still just 15, maybe 16 years old. Now, again, her father was more understanding. They almost had like a friendship. But again, her mother, she did not approve of this. And the mother went as far as to accuse Olga of having a sexual relationship with her own father, and that's why they were so friendly with each other. Now, Olga was in a dire situation, as you can see from the outside. Even though her father is trying to help her, trying to talk about this with her, her mother hates her and accuses her of having an incestual relationship with her dad, while she feels guilty for not abiding by the family traditions. She feels guilty for leaving her husband, and her ex-husband hates her and looks down on her for leaving them. And she was still so young, way too young to experience all of these emotions at once. And she must have been just under so much pressure that I can't even imagine. After finally moving back home with her parents, she first started sneaking out, leaving the house without permission, and then she had a failed suicide attempt until she just escaped from the home and did not come home for months. She moved to the city but had trouble finding work because she was still very young, completely inexperienced, and had absolutely no certifications or professions at all. So she had no choice but to sell the jewelry that she got from her mom for her 15th birthday, but soon the money ran low and she had no choice but to move back in with her family again, now for the third time. But something was even worse now than ever before. While she was away for those couple of months, her father died of heart failure or a heart attack. And her mom blamed Olga for breaking her father's heart, and that's what caused this heart failure that finally killed him. Of course, you know that this is not how heart failures work, but symbolically speaking, I guess the mother blamed this on Olga as well. So now Olga was not only back in this abusive, way too strictly traditional household with the mother that despises her and the shame of having left her ex-husband, now she was also blamed for the untimely death of her father. Interestingly, her family was still willing to take her back in and, so to speak, forgive her for her crimes of running away way too many times, with the one condition that she starts working in the family business. Now, we call it a business, but honestly it can hardly be called that. It's just that every member of this family sold fabric and vegetables on the street. And this is what Olga had to do now to keep things going. And one day, when she and her little sister were taking a car trip to another town to pick up some more merchandise, somewhere halfway, Olga instructed her sister to just get out of the car, and then she turned around and took her direction to the capital city, Budapest. There she sold her car and all of her valuables to try to make ends meet, but unfortunately she soon ran out of money. She even put up ads in the newspaper trying to search for any kind of job that she could, but all of these attempts were unsuccessful. And just after a couple of months, by the February of 1993, she was completely broke and had nowhere to go. She knew that she could not go home again to her family, where she already escaped from so many times. And the next and only place she could go was the streets of Budapest. There she started offering sexual services in exchange for money. And let me just reiterate that at this point, Olga wasn't even an adult yet. She wasn't even 18 years old yet. She was 16 or 17 years old by the time she was already over an arranged marriage, a separation, the death of her father, and being rejected and then taken back in by her abusive mother a number of times. She was broke and she had no one to count on, and she had no other choice but to resort to sex work to just survive until tomorrow. And then just after 3 months, her body was found dismembered, disgustingly dismembered in a swamp, discarded like she was a nothing, like she was a nobody, like nobody ever missed her or cared about her. But who killed her and why? That was what the police had to figure out next. Could it be her terrible, abusive, way too strict mother who openly despised and threatened Olga multiple times? I mean, yes, it seems like a strong possibility that her mom hated her so much for not abiding by the traditions. On the other hand, she also took her daughter back in on 3 occasions. So it seems unlikely that she would now go out of her way to track Olga down in a different city and overpower her and get rid of her body in such a disgusting way. I could imagine that her mom gets so angry that in the heat of the moment, in an angry rage, like she beats her daughter, but Olga's murder was definitely premeditated, and this seems like an awful lot of work for a middle-aged woman to go and try to murder someone so brutally. Like, what was done to Olga definitely needed a lot of power, and it just didn't seem like that was what her mom would be able to do. The next person of interest was her ex-husband. And yes, it seems like that's a possibility because she left her ex-husband twice, right, before they finally separated for real. And divorce or separation of any kind in the Roma tradition is an unremovable patch of dirt on someone's reputation. The ex-husband was probably forever shamed by the family members and the people in town for having been left by his wife. But Roma people are actually not known for resorting to murder as a form of revenge. If a woman shames a man, they would shave her hair. And if a wife has sex with somebody other than the husband, such as in sex work, they would just shave her pubic hair. Murder, especially so brutal, is definitely not something that Roma people would generally do to take revenge on someone. So they could also be the ex-husband, and his family could also be eliminated. The next person that could be was Olga's pimp. Thank God I can say that I am not familiar with the street life of Budapest, so I do not know what a good or what a bad pimp is, but by all accounts, Olga's pimp was a good pimp, meaning that he only took half of his girl's income, and in exchange he also gave accommodation and food, and otherwise he just left his girls alone. Like, he meant no trouble. I mean, a pimp, the very nature of a pimp is exploitative, in my opinion, because if a woman wants to or has to resort to sex work, I don't understand why they have to do it through a pimp. Like, what does the pimp do? Anybody can stand on the street and take clients. What do you need a pimp for? But in any case, it seems like Olga's pimp was no trouble, and he was also eliminated as a suspect. So the last possibility was one of Olga's clients. The police were able to find the actual last client of Olga's, who hired her on the 19th of May, so only 4 days before the remains were found. And now let me stop there for a second because something doesn't seem to add up. Remember when in the beginning I told you that the investigators first assumed that the remains were there for 8 to 10 days before they were discovered? So then how could the last client take Olga out and hire Olga only 4 days before her remains were found? Well, the sources may just be incorrect, but what I'm inclined to think is that the police first thought that the remains were older than they were because they were in an advanced stage of decomposition because of the warm weather and the bacteria found in the swamp. So it is possible that she was there only for 3 or 4 days, but it looked like she was there for 8 to 10 days. But the sources don't go into this in detail and I cannot confirm, that's just my speculation. But in any case, we know that a man named Ferenc Zoltán was seen taking Olga to his apartment by taxi in the early hours of the 19th of May. And Ferenc was actually a surgeon's assistant in the local hospital, but he was fired for undisclosed reasons only a month before Olga's murder. Do you remember when I mentioned that Olga's torso was methodically gutted and her body parts were found in body bags used in hospitals? I mean, it is quite convenient that Ferenc was a surgeon's assistant working in a hospital until recently, and the police was also able to find the taxi driver who gave a ride to the couple. This taxi driver was able to tell where exactly he took them, and it was to a house in the outskirts of Budapest, just a mere kilometer away from the swamp where Olga's body was discovered. The police went to this house where the taxi driver took them, but they found no evidence or no traces of evidence. There was no indication that a murder happened there. And despite knowing that he was a doctor surgeon and had access to body bags used in hospitals, and having taken Olga to a house so close to the place where then she was found murdered and butchered into pieces, the police was not able to charge Ferenc with anything because all of these aforementioned things were just circumstantial evidence. So he got off the hook. But here is the kicker. Ferenc was often seen with the man that Olga was most afraid of, a man named Sándor. You see, just 2 weeks before Olga was last seen alive, Sándor hired her for the night and took her out to a remote location by car and threatened her that if she doesn't do exactly and everything that he tells her to, then he was going to kill her, dismember her, and scatter her body parts around so that nobody would ever find her. Which sounds a lot like exactly what happened to Olga in the end. I think that many people assume wrongly that sex workers are just okay with absolutely everything, that the client can do whatever they want and threaten her to death if they want, and the sex worker would be okay with this because after all it's her job. But this cannot be further from the truth. Sex workers also have their boundaries, what they are willing to do and they are not willing to do, and non-consensual sex is rape no matter a person's profession or job. But back to the story. Thank God Olga was able to escape from this man that time, because he got out of the car to take a leak, and while he was doing that, Olga jumped to the driver's seat and got the fuck away from that place. The man, partially nude, caught a taxi and followed her back to the city. Unfortunately, Olga was quite easy to find because she went back to the same street where she usually works at. And as soon as this man caught up with her, he attacked her with a knife and almost killed her, if it wasn't for the other sex workers that saved her life from this man. So Olga survived that night, but as you know, she wasn't able to escape from this man for too long, or so it seems. And every day for the next several days, Sándor went back to the same street where Olga worked, trying to hire her, trying to get her to go away with him again so that he could finish what he had started. But Olga was smarter than this, and she was never going to go anywhere with this man again. And Sándor knew that. So he asked his friends to try to lure Olga away by hiring her and bringing her to a remote location to Sándor so that he could finish what he had started, so that he could rape and murder her. Could one of these friends be Ferenc, the assistant surgeon? I mean, they had been seen together before. But what happened next is unknown. The next thing that we know for sure is that Sándor had a bloody bedsheet, and he tried cleaning it with disinfectant bleach. But even though the bleach was not able to get rid of all of the blood in the sheet, it was able to disintegrate the DNA so that it could not be definitely matched to Olga. And with the lack of evidence, Sándor was also off the hook. But worry not, because he's serving a long prison sentence for other crimes, so he is at least not lurking in the streets. But all in all, nobody was ever convicted for the murder of Olga. We do not know exactly what happened to her. It's all just a speculation. But it seems awfully convenient that Ferenc, the surgeon assistant, has access to body bags and knows how to probably dismember a person into all of these tiny pieces. And Ferenc was seen with Sándor, the person who wanted to get revenge on Olga for stealing his car and escaping from him. Well, I believe, in my personal opinion, that these two men worked together to get rid of Olga. And they knew that nobody was going to search for her because her family rejected her, and it seemed like nobody was going to miss her anymore. And it makes me really angry that with all of this circumstantial evidence, the police was not able to convict any of these men for the murder of Olga. Yes, it is possible that they were not the murderer. It is possible that this was just circumstantial evidence and they actually had nothing to do with Olga's murder. But I feel like it was such a sloppy crime that if the police had tried a little bit harder, I'm sure that they would have been able to find more DNA traces, more evidence, more witnesses. I just feel like they overlooked Olga's case for 3 reasons: that she was a woman, that she was a Roma, and she was a sex worker. And the combination of these 3 was just not of enough urgency for the police to look into better, in my personal opinion. But I wasn't there, so I can't tell. But what is for sure is that Olga suffered a terrible fate for nothing. She was just killed out of rage, anger, revenge, probably, but nobody took her case seriously because of her circumstances. I'm just so sad that Olga was so young and she had already endured so many things and so much trouble and rejection by people, and not finding her place, not be able to fit in, not wanting to follow the family traditions and made guilty for it. And in the end, she was murdered for nothing. I really hope that the murderers of Olga will one day pay for their crime greatly. But that is the end of this case, and just thank you so much for taking the time of your day to listen to Olga's story. This was already probably way more attention than what she was given in the months leading up to her murder, and I really hope that her case is solved as soon as possible. I hope that the murderers are convicted once and for all. So thank you so much for watching, and I see you next time.